how to pray to the Almighty and to remember Him, which is the minimum that we humans are expected to present as a thanksgiving exercise before the Almighty, which is what we wouldn't have been able to come up with on our own if this law wouldn't have been there. Likewise, we humans always feel inclined to help out fellow humans. We know that the way this worldly life has been designed, some people, they excel in economic activities, and there are others who lag behind. Uh, the resources in this worldly life, for the sake of the trial that the Almighty has put all humans into, resources are limited. And some people have resources more than what they need. And there are others who have resources much less than what they need. So humans, within their moral appreciation, understanding, always have a feeling, those who are rich, that they need to help their fellow brothers and sisters who are in need, who are poor. But how much should they help them? What is the minimum level of help which, if they have done, they should feel morally comfortable that they have done at least the minimum that they were expected to do? So the Almighty has given the law of zakat, which enables humans to know that uh, if they have gone for it, this particular minimum contribution towards their fellow humans, they have done at least the minimum acceptable form of sharing. Similarly, we humans are compelled to undertake political activity. We all need the umbrella, the administration of the state, and to run our affairs or allow our affairs to be run by some people who are at the helm of the affairs. But how exactly should the collective affairs of humans be run? Uh, Apart from certain other principles, the Sharia says that the political system of Muslims ought to always run on the basis of mutual consultation. They've got to consult each other, talk to each other, and come to conclusions either through consensus. But if consensus is not possible, then they should go for the majority rule. The majority, if is siding with one particular decision, that's what the decision for the Muslims is. Similarly, we also have a very important and quite often a very controversial area of punishments. There are many crimes which are committed by humans in the society. All those crimes are considered to be crimes, to be unacceptable acts of violence on the part of humans. People murder other people. People commit thefts. They falsely accuse others of fornication and adultery. They indulge in fornication and adultery. They cause, above all, mischief on earth, wherein, because of the negative approach, attitude of an individual or a certain group of individuals, at times, lives, property, and honor of the members of the society are at stake because of the negative approach, violent and aggressive approach of certain individuals. How should they be dealt with? It's a very difficult question. On the one hand, one would not like to allow these crimes to continue to take place in the society. On the other hand, one would want to see that the punishment that is given is good enough, adequate enough for the crime to be checked, and it therefore should act as a deterrent. But what exactly should be the punishment? The Almighty has given five punishments in His law very clearly, uh, which have been specified, and the Muslims are expected to follow them. All in all, this Sharia talks about some other areas of human interest as well, where individuals left on their own would always have been at a loss to understand as to what exactly needs to be done in these areas. But the Almighty has come to our rescue by giving us a law which is very clear, specific, and is expecting believers to follow it for them to be able to be good, obedient servants of the Almighty. As I said earlier, this law is entirely based on human morality, human wisdom, but it's that part of wisdom and morality which generally escapes the attention of human beings. Uh, Finally, what I would like to say about this whole area is that as Muslims, we are expected to understand this law as best as we can, uh, and as honestly as is possible. We can disagree with each other as to what exactly that law is. It's expressed in words in the Quran. It has been mentioned in some cases in the practices of Sunnah. Both sources have to be understood. And obviously, we have at our disposal a body of knowledge called Hadith, which is the footnote explanation of the Quran and the Sunnah. Despite the fact that the Almighty has given a very clear understanding of what this Sharia law is, Muslims have disagreed because human understanding of a text can always be different, can always go wrong, and therefore we have uh, a diversity of views regarding what exactly is the Sharia verdict on a particular issue at hand. We present this law as God's law because that's the way it is. Uh, but we don't invite people, non-Muslims, to accept Islam as God's message on the basis of this law. Uh, we are not apologetic about it, but we must know that this law is what we have been given by the Almighty, and unless we believe in His message, the Quran, the Sunnah, we believe in the Prophet Muhammad, God's mercy be on him, as God's messenger, we will not be able to properly understand it. So at times, my own personal understanding is that we Muslims uh, are at fault when we try to invite non Muslims to understand the Sharia law in order for them to come close to Islam. Islam needs to be presented to non Muslims, non believers, through its belief system, presentation of its faith beliefs with arguments, through the presentation of the fact that human morality is presented by Islam as the basic principle on which this whole edifice of God's message is based. And based on these two important pillars, we also have a third pillar in the form of Islamic Sharia, which we are here to explain and to answer queries regarding it. But it's not something that we would put in front, at the forefront, for others to look at and to start taking decisions regarding God's message. Quite clearly, some aspects of the Sharia are the ones which do attract the attention of the non-Muslims, like our formal prayer and certain other aspects of our rituals, which we undergo in order for us to be good Muslims. But by and large, this law is something that one is normally able to appreciate more when one becomes a believer in the message that the Almighty has given to us. That's all for today from me, and I'll now expect you to comment or ask questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zahir. And sorry, everybody, we had to wait a couple of minutes before we started, but please unmute your microphone and start asking questions. The questions have to be on the topic of this class. If we have further time available left, then you can ask general questions. Also, one question per person, please. And then again, if there's time left, then I'll let you ask more questions. So unmute your microphone and start asking, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Khalid. My question is that certain punishments uh, were given at the time in the conditions of the society. We don't see cutting of hands these days. We don't see stoning. So what when we try to explain to non-Muslims why we had such hard punishment, is it possible for us to tell them that these are not being implemented today? It depends on the condition of the society and why the crime was committed.
I think that's why I mentioned that we're not going to be apologetic. We're absolutely clear that the law is from God. But as I said, it's a law which uh, many people may not be able to properly understand unless they have the complete perspective of our religion and its teachings. It's a law which is most certainly not meant only for the times when it was revealed. It's a law which is meant for all times to come. The way the society has evolved, more particularly in the West, uh, people generally speaking are more uh, inclined to accept that people commit theft and others are deprived of their wealth, but they are not inclined to accept the fact that one, two, or a few individuals are deprived of their hand. That's the way people have started thinking. The Almighty, when we talk about Sharia, we have this understanding at the back of our whole, at the back of our mind to appreciate this whole presentation that God knows better than us. God knows what is good for us and He knows what is not good for us. He wants us to be sympathetically inclined towards other fellow human beings. But what exactly does it mean that we should be sympathetic towards others? Should we more should we be more sympathetic towards those people who are unjustifiably deprived of their wealth by certain people who are thieves, or should we be more sympathetic towards the thieves who continue to commit this crime? The Almighty knows that unless there is a stern, strict punishment, uh, the theft would continue to be committed by certain individuals, and therefore this punishment has been given by the Almighty, has been introduced by Him. It was certainly not meant for a certain point in time. It was meant for all times to come. Even today, if there is a society where all humans are being provided with a minimum standard of living, and there is no reason why a person would be desperately looking for wealth or resources for him to maintain his life or the lives of his family. If there is no such inclination, the circumstances are okay, then the society ought to implement this punishment, even though some people may not like it.
Thank you very much, sir. Um, any other questions on Zoom? Please unmute your microphone and start asking. Okay. So there are some questions that I have received, and I will start asking some of these, and then there are some questions on social media that we can take. Um, so what the question is, it's about punishments again, that, what are the punishments for, let's say, riba and um, going out of marital relationships or inheritance, if you don't follow the inheritance laws, as you mentioned, or eating of, you know, uh, flesh of animals that are forbidden. So Allah Ta'ala has He defined any punishments for these?
I mentioned five punishments in my presentation, and those are the only punishments that the Almighty has mentioned in His law, in His Sharia. There is a punishment for theft, there is a punishment for murder, there is punishment for fornication. It was asked in the question. Yes, it is. If fornication is proved, then it's flogging 100 lashes in front of public gaze. There is punishment for false accusation. If somebody accuses somebody else of fornication falsely, that is 80 lashes, and mischief on earth, which is serial killing, uh, which is people indulging in dequity, or people committing rapes, etc. Then the punishment uh, is killing those individuals mercilessly. Now, there could be different ways of doing it. Apart from these five crimes, there is no other punishment that has been mentioned in the Sharia of the Almighty. However, it's the prerogative of a society to decide as to whether one they would want to go for punishments for other crimes as well or not. But whatever they would decide, as I mentioned, the case of the political law, they will have to decide on the basis of mutual consultation. And if they come up with a certain law, it's going to be a man-made law, not a Sharia law, which can always be repealed and undone if the majority begins to feel that this law was not a good idea. So the Almighty's punishment, his prescribed punishments are only five. Apart from that, if people are doing things wrong, the society can either come up with its own proposals of punishment, or would go for requiring people to refrain from such evil deeds by urging them, by reminding them, by reprimanding them, by penalizing them, etc. But there's no further list in that can be added to the Islamic punishments.
Thank you, sir. Again, if you have any questions on Zoom, please unmute your microphone and ask, or you can type in those questions in the chat, and I will read those out to Dr. Zaheer.
If you give me a little time, I have one more question whenever you think I can.
Yes, I'll let you know. If there are no more questions, then I'll definitely take another question
Thank
from you.
you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Zaheer, the question is that can these offenses be forgiven? Because obviously there are certain offenses that a person makes against Allah Ta'ala, and Allah Ta'ala has several ways to forgive those by making nawafil and things like that. So can these offenses be forgiven that you mentioned in the Sharia?
In all these five cases, uh, the only way an individual is is eligible to be punished is when the crime has been committed in a manner that A, he or she had no excuse, no genuine, reasonable compulsion to go for it, one. And secondly, the crime was committed in a way that there was absolutely no doubt about it that it was committed. So, if these two conditions are satisfied, then the individual is going to go through the formally prescribed punishment in the Sharia. As far as seeking forgiveness from the Almighty is concerned, no individual who commits a crime and then goes through the process of punishment is going to be forgiven simply because he has undergone punishment. For the individual to be forgiven from by the Almighty, he or she would need to undergo tawbah, repentance, which the individual can also undergo, even if he or she doesn't go through punishment. So punishments are only meant for the society to be gotten rid of the crime that has been committed. The philosophy behind these punishments is that these punishments, if they go unchecked, they have a tendency to multiply. Uh, it's a disease which is contagious. If you allow people to continue to commit thefts, then it would become attractive for other people to also get into the act. So unless and until the society shows its firm commitment that these are absolutely unacceptable no-go areas, and there can be no compromise. Uh, these acts of violence offenses can go on. So forgiveness to an individual is going to be, if the individual is going to seek forgiveness from the Almighty, these punishments are meant for the society to be cleansed from these crimes.
Great. Thank you, sir. Um, Another question is, what are the 5 punishments for non-payment of zakat? Are there any that you can shed light on?
Actually, when a person doesn't pay zakat, he is uh, he is actually going against the state authority. Uh, at the time of the Caliph Abu Bakr Raziyallahu anhu, there were some people who refused to pay zakat. He fought against them. But that was because those people who refused to pay zakat were the ones who were then, as a consequence, considered non Muslims. It was as if they had declared that they are no more believers, because the Quran has very clearly specified that for a person to become a believer, for a person to declare his belief, he has to do two things: say his prayers regularly and pay zakat. And we know that those who were the immediate addressees of the Messenger of God, may God's mercy be on him, they had no choice but to actually accept Islam as their religion, or else face punishment. So there were some people who accepted Islam while the Prophet himself was there. But then when he left this world, they declared that they are no more Muslims, not by mentioning this statement, but by refusing to pay zakat. So the fight against them was because they refused to pay zakat, and thus they became non-Muslims. They were therefore murtad, they were apostates. When it comes to not giving zakat in the present times, well, the state has its own ways of forcing the individual to pay zakat, as indeed they are able to do it in the case of taxes. So that kind of punishment is not needed anymore. It's just simply somebody who is not willing to do so is going to be forced to do it. And as I said earlier, the state obviously can come up with its own punishment, which it can legislate, it can come up, it can decide through mutual consultation, but there is no Islamically prescribed punishment for it.
All right, sir. Thank you. Um, so there is another question that Quran says to repel evil with what is good. So first, what does it mean, and does it really apply in the case of these punishments and Sharia uh, implementation?
No, it's a general principle that the Almighty has taught to Muslims when they are preaching the Almighty's message. What he has mentioned is that if individuals are facing hardships and difficulties at the hands of others, and others are being unreasonable and are inflicting upon them, certain uh, physical, mental difficulties, uh, they have a right to repel. If they do, it has to be not more than what they faced, the difficulties they were given to face. Anything more is going to be considered as unacceptable. However, the Almighty says that the better option is that we do not retaliate, we don't take revenge, and we repel evil with goodness. This particular principle is more important for those people who are in the field of promoting the Almighty's message. Idfa billati hiya ahsan. You repel what is evil with what is good. فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ عَدَاوَةٌ. Then what you will find is that the one with whom you had enmity, كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ, he is going to turn into a very good close bosom friend of yours. وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا. However, this is not what you can get unless you are very patient and steadfast. وَمَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا ذُو حَظٍّ عَظِيمٍ. And this is what one cannot get unless one is a really lucky person, a person who is gifted by the Almighty.
All right, sir. Thank you. Rafia Saiba, you can start asking your next question, please.
Dr. Khalid, Ghamidi Saab in one of his lectures was asked about iddat, if a woman is a widow. And he said that now with the process available of ultrasound and scan, if there's no pregnancy, so there's no necessity of the 3 months iddat. Isn't this evolving Sharia?
I've got two things to say about it. No, it is not. It is actually understanding the real basis of Sharia and applying it in an age where, because of the advanced technology, we now know for sure that what was the real intent of Sharia has actually been properly fulfilled and satisfied. His basis of the basis of his understanding is that when a lady delivers a child, even after 1 day or 2 days after she becomes a widow, her iddat period is going to be over. Now, because of that, he comes to the conclusion that the real purpose of the period of iddat was to make sure as to whether the lady is pregnant from her ex-husband or not, or her deceased husband or not. Now, if that can be ensured, then there is no need for iddat to be enforced anymore, because the basic reason it has already been established is not there anymore. Now, what he thinks is that because of the advancement in modern medical science, we now know for sure that certain ladies are not actually pregnant, and therefore they do not need to wait for their period anymore. As a very ordinary student of him, I don't feel very comfortable with this his verdict for two reasons. One, this might actually be correct if we look at the application of the law in case of widows. But as far as divorce is concerned, and I'm not too sure whether he actually mentions it in the case of divorce as well, uh, I think he doesn't. Because in divorce, there is another consideration uh, which is important. That is, during this waiting period, the husband should have the right to reconsider his decision and to reconcile. Even in case of a widow, uh, there are mentions within the modern science and the advanced technology of medical science. There are opinions which say that even if a lady is declared technically not pregnant, there is a possibility of pregnancy to emerge later on as a consequence of some remnant of sperm hiding somewhere. I am completely unaware of this field, but if there is a reason for this understanding to be true, then I think we should stick to the original verdict of the Sharia for the waiting period of 4 months and 10 days. So I think uh, obviously we need to be very careful before we introduce a certain principle which seems to be apparently different from the original verdict of the Sharia.
Thank you, sir. So we have only a couple of minutes left, and there's one general question online that I'll ask you, and you can just kind of, give a short answer before you leave, because tonight's Sunday night. Um, so there are stories in Quran about birds and ants having rational conversations with the Prophet Solomon, alayhi salam. And we know that animals don't have this capacity to hold conversations. How is this possible?
When we say conversation, we do not necessarily mean that there are objects that are talking to each other verbally in a language that we know as language. We know, for instance, that the Quran is mentioning the fact that whatever is in the heavens and the earth is glorifying Him. Now, obviously, God is getting glorified um, in many different ways. Uh, when we praise God, we mention His praise in words which are intelligible. But there are other ways also of glorifying. Well, we also bow down to God in, and we worship Him in gestures as well. So it seems that there are other ways of communication that different objects of this world have are allowed or have been given the capacity to indulge into. And it seems that the ants and the birds and other creatures about whom it has been talked of that they also communicate, it's that kind of communication.
Thank you very much, sir. So we are out of time for tonight. But thank you, everybody. And inshallah, we'll see you all next week. Jazakallah. Thank
Inshallah.
you so much, sir.
Salam alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.